The bouquet hit my chest before I even realized what was happening. A blur of white roses, silk ribbon, and gasps followed as my fingers closed around it out of instinct. The room went still, that eerie, weightless stillness right before something unthinkable happens. I felt dozens of eyes on me, some wide with disbelief, others narrowing in suspicion. And then, over the hum of shocked whispers, came his voice, deep, clear, and utterly unshaken. "Then marry me now." The words sliced through the air like a blade, freezing the bridal march mid-note. Every head turned, some toward him, others toward me, but all with the same look. Did he just say that? He stood at the edge of the aisle, hands in his pockets, the faintest curve to his lips, not a smile, not quite, but a look that told me this wasn't a joke. My pulse raced, my grip on the bouquet tightening until the stems bent beneath my fingers. Around us, the wedding hall seemed to blur. The bridesmaids stared as though I'd stolen the crown jewels. The bride herself was pale, her knuckles white around her own bouquet. The grooms, no, the CEO's gaze never left mine. The moment felt unreal, like stepping off the edge of a cliff without knowing if there was ground below. My mind screamed to move, to laugh, to break the tension. But my body stayed rooted, as if the gravity in his voice had pulled me into a place I couldn't walk away from. The silence shattered like glass. Gasps erupted from every corner of the hall, followed by a ripple of whispers that swelled into a chaotic chorus. The bride's face drained of color, her bouquet slipping from her grip and landing on the polished floor with a muted thud. Her maid of honor leaned in, murmuring something urgent, but her eyes never left me, sharp, unblinking, as though I had just committed an unforgivable sin. Several guests stood, craning their necks for a better view, their phones already lifting to capture the scene. The CEO stepped forward, unhurried, each stride echoing against a marble aisle like a countdown. His gaze locked on mine, unreadable yet impossibly intense, and for a terrifying second, I thought he might actually mean it. That this wasn't some careless quip, but a declaration in front of every witness that mattered. Behind him, the groom's side shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh, to intervene, or to watch the scandal unfold. I caught a glimpse of his mother in the front row, her hand frozen mid-clap, eyes wide with disbelief. The air grew thick, heavy with anticipation, as if the entire room had collectively forgotten how to breathe. And then he was standing in front of me, close enough for me to see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, close enough that his scent, clean, warm, and familiar, reached me over the scent of crushed roses in my hands. "You're holding my bouquet now," he said softly, but the weight in his tone carried far beyond us. "So, tell me, will you stand here with me?" My fingers tightened around the bouquet until I felt the stem strain, the ribbon biting into my palm. Every muscle in my body screamed for me to take a step back, to laugh it off, to make the whole thing disappear before it spiraled further out of control. But my legs refused to move. The CEO's eyes, dark and unwavering, held me like a current I couldn't swim against. Somewhere to my left, a guest whispered my name, not in recognition, but in disbelief, and the sound rippled through the room like a spark searching for dry kindling. The bride's breathing hitched audibly, her hand clutching the back of the nearest chair for support. Her father shifted in his seat, jaw tightening as though ready to intervene. But no one did. Not yet. The single word caught in my throat, barely audible even to myself. My heart hammered, the sound so loud it drowned out the faint click of cameras capturing my hesitation. His posture didn't shift, but the air between us seemed to pull tighter, as if the whole room was leaning forward for my answer. Then he took a half step closer, closing the gap, lowering his voice just enough so only I could hear, and yet I knew the weight of it would carry to everyone watching. "If you take one step toward me, there's no turning back." And that was the moment I realized it wasn't just a question. It was a line drawn in the marble aisle, and crossing it meant rewriting both of our lives in front of everyone who mattered. The first step I took toward him was almost imperceptible, but in that wedding hall, it might as well have been a gunshot. A collective gasp tore through the crowd, followed by an explosion of voices, some calling my name, others demanding to know what I thought I was doing. The bride's bouquet still lay abandoned on the floor, its petals crushed beneath a guest's hurried step. But all eyes were on me now. The CEO's expression didn't change. He simply extended his hand, palm up, like he'd been waiting for this moment far longer than the past 5 minutes. Somewhere to my right, a bridesmaid clutched the arm of another, whispering frantically while her eyes flicked between the bride and me. The bride herself had gone rigid, her hands clenched so tightly at her sides I wondered if she could feel her own nails digging into her skin. Gasps turned to a low rumble of outrage and disbelief. Phones angled higher, their little red lights blinking as they recorded every breath, every heartbeat. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the ribbon of the bouquet brushing against my wrist like a reminder of how accidental this all was, and how impossible it would be to undo. He didn't rush me. He didn't have to. The weight of his stare was its own gravity, drawing me closer. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, and yet somehow lighter, as though I was walking straight into the eye of a storm I'd been circling for years. When my fingers finally brushed his, the crowd's noise broke into chaos. The instant my fingers closed around his, the CEO stepped forward, positioning himself between me and the storm of stares. His grip was firm, grounding, like he'd claimed me before the entire world and had no intention of letting go. "You heard me," he said, voice carrying over the rising commotion. "Marry me. Now." The officiant froze mid-breath, eyes darting to the bride, who was still rooted in place, her lips parted in silent disbelief. Someone in the second row let out a disbelieving laugh that died instantly when the CEO's gaze swept over them. The air in the hall thickened, a cocktail of tension, scandal, and adrenaline. He didn't wait for anyone's approval. With his free hand, he reached for the bouquet I still held, his fingers brushing against mine before curling over the ribbon. "You caught this," he said softly, but every word was meant to be heard. "It's yours, and so am I if you'll take me." The guests reacted like a wave crashing against the shore, half gasps, half murmurs of outrage. The bride's mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, while the groom's side erupted into frantic whispers. My heart slammed against my ribs, my pulse deafening in my ears. Then he tugged gently, guiding me 2 steps closer to the altar, as if this were always how the ceremony was meant to end. The room seemed to tilt, my vision narrowing to him, the flowers, and the space between us that was vanishing with every breath. Whatever was coming next, it was going to break something, or someone, in ways that couldn't be undone. Every sound in the hall seemed to fade, replaced by the relentless pounding of my own heartbeat. His hand enveloped mine, warm and unyielding, and for a moment it felt like the rest of the world had been pushed to the edges of my vision. Faces blurred, some shocked, some furious, others wide-eyed with the thrill of watching a scandal unravel in real time. The bride finally moved, a sharp inhale breaking the fragile stillness. "This is insane," she whispered, but the microphone at the altar caught her words, sending them echoing across the room. The ripple of murmurs that followed was immediate, restless. I could feel the weight of her gaze on me, the unspoken challenge in it. But before I could respond, his voice cut through again, steady, deliberate. "Look at me," he said, and I did. "This isn't a stunt. You know that." His eyes held mine with an intensity that pinned me in place, stripping away every excuse I could have clung to. "So either walk away now, or take the next step with me." My breath caught. The bouquet felt heavier in my grip, the scent of roses and ribbon tangled with the rush of adrenaline surging through me. I thought about the years of staying in the background, about the quiet moments no one else knew existed. And then, with every camera lens trained on us, I took one small step forward, a a step that made the crowd erupt like thunder. Gasps, shouts, flashes of light. Somewhere in the chaos, he smiled, not triumphant but certain. There was no going back now. The altar felt impossibly close now, each step echoing in my ears like the beat of a war drum. The officiant straightened his notes with trembling fingers, clearly unsure if he was presiding over a wedding or a public scandal. Guests spilled into the aisle, some craning their necks for a better view, others whispering so loudly it no longer counted as whispering. The bride's veil was trembling in her hands, her eyes locked on me with a mixture of disbelief and something sharper, betrayal. The CEO didn't falter. He kept my hand anchored in his, guiding me forward with the certainty of someone who had already made peace with the chaos behind him. "You can still stop," he murmured, low enough that it could have been a trick of the air, but the squeeze of his fingers told me it wasn't. I thought about stopping. I thought about handing back the bouquet, about vanishing into the crowd before the story solidified into something permanent. But the heat of his presence, the way his voice cut through the noise, kept me rooted to the path. And when we reached the first step of the altar, he turned to face the crowd, his posture radiating ownership. "She caught the bouquet," he announced, his tone calm, almost conversational, yet it carried to the farthest corner of the hall. "And I won't let her give it back." The room erupted, half in outrage, half in something dangerously close to applause. Cameras flashed, guests leaned forward, and in that charged heartbeat, I realized we had stepped over a line we couldn't uncross. The hall fractured into noise, sharp gasps, muffled curses, the metallic click of camera shutters firing in rapid succession. Somewhere near the back, a chair toppled, the sound cutting through the din like a warning bell. The bride's mother stood, her hand pressed hard against her pearls, lips moving in silent outrage. On the opposite side, a cluster of younger guests had their phones held high, eyes gleaming with the thrill of capturing history or scandal in real time. The CEO didn't flinch. If anything, the chaos seemed to harden the line of his jaw, his grip on my hand a silent statement that there would be no retreat. "Let them talk," he murmured, voice pitched just for me, though I knew the microphones hidden around the altar would catch every word. They were going to anyway. I caught sight of the bride. She was no longer frozen. She was stepping forward, her veil trembling with each sharp breath. Her heels clicked against the marble, the sound a steady, deliberate drumbeat of fury. Our eyes met for a split second, and in hers I saw not confusion, but an icy, calculated resolve. The officiant shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us and the approaching bride as though expecting one of us to surrender. But the CEO only turned slightly, positioning himself more firmly between me and the aisle. The gesture was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it sent a clear message to everyone watching. Whatever line had been crossed, he wasn't going to let me be dragged back over it. The bride stopped just short of the altar, her heels clicking to a halt on the marble. The air seemed to crystallize between us, a narrow strip of space where all the whispers, all the outrage, collided and fell silent. Her gaze cut past me and landed squarely on the CEO, sharp enough to slice through the tension like glass. "This is my wedding," she said, her voice low but carrying with perfect clarity. "And you're making a spectacle of it." His hand tightened around mine. "No," he replied, his tone as controlled as it was dangerous. "I'm ending a lie." The words hit harder than any shout could have, and the crowd reacted with a collective gasp, followed by a flurry of murmurs that rippled through the rows like a current. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the bride's expression shifted from shock to something like resignation, as if she had just realized there was no winning this in front of so many witnesses. Her hand loosened on the veil, letting it fall back from her shoulders, her posture straightening into a rigid defiance. "Then you've chosen your scandal," she said. The CEO stepped forward, still shielding me from her, his frame casting a shadow that felt both protective and final. "I've chosen my truth," he corrected, his voice steady but his eyes never leaving hers. Around us, phones were still raised, lenses capturing every flicker of emotion, every unspoken ending. And in that moment, with the crowd holding its breath, I understood whatever came next would define us all, and there was no turning back. The crowd had shifted from murmuring to outright chaos. Some guests stood on the pews for a better view, while others pressed forward into the aisle, their faces alight with curiosity, scandal, or outrage. The hum of whispers now carried names, accusations, and fragments of stories that would multiply and twist long after today. Every flash from a phone camera felt like a spark igniting dry tinder. The CEO didn't waver. He kept me at his side, his hand firm at the small of my back, as if anchoring me against a tide of noise. Each step we took toward the altar felt deliberate, like the slow toll of a bell marking the moment the ceremony veered into something entirely different. Not a wedding, but a declaration. On the left, a young reporter in the crowd leaned toward her cameraman, whispering frantically as she filmed. On the right, an older guest shook his head, his mouth forming the words shameful and disgrace, though his eyes never looked away. The aisle had never felt so long, and yet somehow we reached the first step in what felt like a breath. The officiant's hands trembled over his script, his eyes darting from the bride, still standing at the edge of the aisle, frozen, to the man now guiding me forward. The silence that fell as we stepped into place was deafening, as if the air itself held its breath for what would happen next. He turned slightly toward me, just enough that I caught the flicker of something in his expression, not just defiance, but certainty. "We finished this," he murmured, and I knew he wasn't asking. The altar had transformed into a stage, and every pair of eyes in the hall was locked on us. The soft flicker of candlelight danced across his face, highlighting the sharp determination etched there. My breath felt heavy in my chest, but his presence beside me steadied each inhale. He didn't glance back at the bride. He didn't need to. His choice had already been made, and he wanted everyone here to know it. The officiant's voice wavered as he tried to resume, his gaze flicking between us and the chaos simmering in the crowd. "Do you both stand here of your own free will?" The question wasn't just ceremonial now. It was a challenge to every whisper, every judgment ricocheting through the pews. "I do," he answered instantly, the words echoing like a strike of a gavel. Gasps rippled through the room again, sharper this time. A woman in the front row clutched her pearls, her mouth forming a silent "oh my God." Behind her, someone's phone buzzed with a breaking news alert. The scandal was already out. The officiant's eyes turned to me, his voice quieter, almost careful. "And you?" The question settled on my shoulders like a weight, pressing down, urging me to step away before it was too late. But my fingers tightened around the bouquet, my anchor in this storm. My voice trembled, but I didn't break eye contact with him. "I do." The room erupted again, louder than before, but he only smiled, not with triumph, but with something far more dangerous: certainty. The sound was deafening now, a mix of clapping, gasps, and raised voices battling to be heard. Some guests applauded as if this was the most romantic thing they'd ever seen, while others hissed in outrage, already reaching for their phones to call someone important. The bride's family sat frozen, expressions carved in stone, while on the groom's side, a few faces turned away entirely, as though refusing to witness the scene. He stepped closer, his hand cupping mine over the bouquet, grounding me as if the chaos couldn't touch us here. "Then it's settled," he said, not to the officiant, not even to the guests, but to me, like a private vow disguised as a public declaration. The warmth in his eyes was so at odds with the storm around us that it made my pulse skip. The officiant swallowed hard, clearly unsure if he should continue, but when he saw neither of us flinch, he lifted his book again. The first words of the vow ceremony echoed through the hall, cutting through the noise like a clear bell. I could still feel the bride's stare boring into me from the side, the weight of it sharp and cold, but I didn't look back. My world had narrowed to him, the altar, and the dangerous certainty that had taken root in my chest. Whatever the headlines would say tomorrow, whatever fallout awaited beyond these walls, it no longer mattered. Because in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of what this wedding was meant to be, we had made our choice. And we were going to see it through to the very end. The officiant's voice steadied as he began the vows, but the weight in the air was unlike any wedding I had ever witnessed. Every word seemed to vibrate against the tension that had thickened the room. I stood beside the CEO, the bouquet still in my hands, my pulse thrumming so hard it felt like the whole hall could hear it. From the corner of my vision, I could see the bride's family, stiff, rigid, their eyes cold and unblinking. The other guests were split down the middle, some leaning forward in fascination, their phones capturing every second, others whispering furiously to each other, their faces tight with disapproval. But he didn't notice them, or if he did, he didn't care. His gaze was on me alone. "Repeat after me," the officiant said. His voice carried over the restless shifting of the audience. "I take you," the CEO began, each syllable deliberate, "to be my partner in life, my constant, and my home." His tone didn't falter once, and with every word, the noise of the crowd seemed to fade, as if the ceremony had collapsed into its own private bubble. When it was my turn, my voice wavered on the first words, but the steadiness in his eyes anchored me. I spoke the vows, each line feeling like a step deeper into uncharted territory, each promise sealing a choice I had never planned to make. Somewhere behind us, a camera shutter clicked. Somewhere else, someone whispered. She actually said it. But I didn't look away from him. In that moment, the rest of the world didn't matter, not anymore. The officiant's final words seemed to echo in slow motion. "You may now kiss the bride." It felt almost surreal, the kind of moment that in any other wedding would be met with soft applause and polite smiles. Here, it was a fuse lit on a powder keg. He stepped toward me without hesitation, his hand rising to the side of my face, warm and steady. The hall fell into a sharp, breathless silence, as though every person was holding still for the inevitable. My heart thundered, so loudly I almost didn't hear the faint, sharp intake of breath from the bride behind us. When his lips touched mine, it wasn't tentative. It was deliberate, sealing a vow neither of us had come here intending to make. Gasps erupted instantly, followed by shouts, some in outrage, others in astonished delight. The sound of camera shutters firing in rapid bursts surrounded us, immortalizing the scandal from every angle. I felt his hand tighten at my waist, not pulling me closer, but anchoring me against the chaos unraveling in the pews. The kiss wasn't long, but it was enough. Enough to set the room alight with whispers, enough to make sure no one could rewrite what had just happened. When he pulled back, the noise hit like a wave. The bride's family was on their feet, the crowd buzzing with disbelief, and somewhere near the aisle, a guest muttered, "This will be everywhere by morning." He didn't look away from me. "It's done," he said quietly, as if the world around us had already disappeared. And in that moment, I almost believed it had. The applause, if you could even call it that, was fractured, scattered between gasps, mutters, and the frantic tapping of phone screens. Some guests were already heading for the doors, no doubt to spread the story before it even had a chance to settle. Others lingered in their seats, leaning toward one another as though they could piece together the truth from fragments they didn't actually witness. The bride was gone. I hadn't seen her leave, but her absence was as loud as the murmurs chasing us down the aisle. He kept my hand in his, guiding me forward with unhurried steps, ignoring the eyes burning into our backs. To anyone else, it might have looked like a victory march, but the truth was, I could feel the weight of what we'd just done pressing on both of us. At the church doors, he paused. The late afternoon light spilled over us, warm but blinding after the dim, candlelit interior. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable for the first time since this began. "Once we step outside," he said quietly, "there's no undoing it." I glanced over my shoulder, taking in the sea of faces still watching, still whispering, still filming. My grip on the bouquet tightened, the silk ribbon winding around my fingers like a tether I couldn't or wouldn't cut. Then I looked back at him. "We already crossed the line," I said, surprising even myself with the steadiness in my voice. And with that, we stepped into the blinding light together, the first step into a storm neither of us could see the end of.